This morning, we are taking a deep dive into the BART system, exploring challenges the transit agency faces and solutions as it looks to move forward. And to start things off, we need to go back 51 years. In 1972, BART launched service in the Bay Area with a promise to take transportation into the future. But a lot has changed since then, and now the agency is struggling to lure riders onto trains. So what happened? Our coverage today begins with John Ramus looking back at BART's history.
It was in 1947 that a joint Army-Navy report was released recommending that some kind of tube or tunnel be built under the bay to transport troops or material if something should happen to the bridges. From it, the dream of BART was born. As the years went by, the concern was no longer about moving troops, but about moving cars.
The Bay Bridge was already, packed every morning with cars, and so there had to be a way to relieve that because there was, people weren't going to be able to get across the bridge anymore.
Mike Healy wrote the book on BART, literally. As unofficial historian and a longtime spokesman for the agency, he was there in 1972 when the system first started operating, and says those were heady times for the engineers who approached the challenge as if it were a moonshot.
BART was the first all-new rail rapid transit system to be built in this country since 1907. So it was considered the space-age system at the time, and it was very exciting.
The unofficial slogan among planners was "Pamper the passenger," and magazine ads across the country trumpeted the comfort of this Tomorrowland ride, promising safe, relaxing travel.
These are the amenities that give people a new kind of transit experience.
I think it was, a very exciting time for the public and the riding public, and they seemed to accept it. There are always little problems, but they seemed to accept it, and ridership grew.
Did it ever? As the population of the East Bay grew, BART cars became cramped at commute hours, and with more people came more problems. Riders had to put up with rude, antisocial behavior and open drug use in aging cars that were often dirty and smelled bad. And then the pandemic hit, and people suddenly felt they had other options.
We have deep concerns about BART. It's lost about 60% of its average daily riders.
Jim Wunderman is CEO of the Bay Area Council, an organization that laid the framework for BART back in the 1950s. He says over the years, the BART board has become focused on various social equity issues, establishing policies that have diminished safety on the trains. He says a recent poll shows that customers are avoiding BART for that reason.
The public doesn't see BART as a social service agency. They're not looking for BART to solve the world's problems. They're looking for BART to provide safe, clean, reliable transit. And I think that to some degree, the board got off in some other directions and, needs to really focus on those things, do those things well, and you're going to win people back.
So has an agency that runs on rails managed to take a wrong turn? Many believe so. But it still has an important role to play in connecting the Bay Area, and there are those who appreciate that.
I've been out here like 10 months. I'm from Louisiana, and they don't have anything like this out there. It's a good little system. Y'all just don't know what y'all have out here. You should enjoy it, use it.
Mike Healy agrees.
Not all cities have anything close to what BART is like. Now, I think the Bay Area is very lucky to have had BART over the years.
The promise still exists, even if not fully delivered. But to convince riders to return, most agree that something big needs to happen to get BART back on track.
So from those early days, BART's model to keep its finances on track was seen as a model of sustainability. Ridership drove revenue. But it was a model that went right off the rails during the pandemic, and BART has not been able to fully recover. Take a look at this. These are mostly empty parking lots at BART stations. This video was from the East Bay in June. Pretty barren there. Fewer riders means less revenue, which means less money to pay for the improvements, which could win back more riders. It's a tough cycle there. So our Lauren Toms takes a closer look at why BART's revenue structure that was once key to its success has become a critical part of its collapse.
Once celebrated for its financial independence, BART is now facing a financial crisis, in large part because of just that, its dependence on riders.
Every afternoon I see the traffic slow down on 24, and I'm just super glad that that's not me.
Pamela Harold takes BART to work every day. She's tasked with keeping BART's budget balanced, and it's no easy feat as BART's ridership plummeted during the pandemic and hasn't fully bounced back.
It is disappointing. We're still very important to the Bay Area.
But the question of returning ridership is a problem without a clear solution. People can't be forced to take BART as more people work from home.
We are about $300 million short in fare revenue. But the interesting thing is that puts us in line with just about every other transit operator in North America.
In 2019, transit agencies across the nation recovered an average of 36% of their revenue from fares alone, as New York and Chicago Metro Transit agencies saw roughly 40% fare box recovery, according to the Federal Transit Authority. In 2022, that operating ratio hovered around 21%, but the challenge BART faces is relying less on rider revenue like other major transit agencies. Before the pandemic, BART was seen as a nationwide model of self-sufficiency. In 2019, fares accounted for 86% of total operating revenue and covered over 60% of its operational expenses. At the height of the pandemic, BART could only cover 7% of its operating expenses with fares. In 2022, that number climbed to just 17%. But even as ridership sank, the transit system continued operating at a high level, ready for communities to bounce back.
You have to make the adjustments to ensure your system is running efficiently and appropriately under the circumstances in which you find yourself. And BART didn't do that.
Senator Steve Glazer's district is home to 6 BART stations and a huge portion of BART's ridership. He's long been a watchdog of the massive transit agency, but is now a vocal critic.
We need them to get their act together, and so far, it's been not a pretty picture.
And some riders agree. Phil Maisel used to ride BART regularly a decade ago, but today chooses to ride sparingly, like to get to the airport.
I try to avoid it, to be honest. To me, like an awkward system because it's not very efficient, like for getting in and around the city of San Francisco.
He says since the pandemic, the biggest improvement he's seen is the carts themselves, and rider Eddie agrees. He and his dog London take BART at least once a week with no plans to stop, but he says his biggest concern lies with security.
It's good. Yeah, we got new trains and they feel a little more secure.
BART leadership widely agreed to sustain operations and continues to withhold cuts despite strikingly low ridership.
I do not support staff taking the time to look at a 10% cut across the board for operations.
Absolutely not.
The pandemic was not of their choosing. It happened. But what they failed to do was make any of the adjustments in the system with the collapse of ridership.
And the spending didn't stop. Transportation and maintenance expenses have exceeded $550 million since 2018, topping $650 million in 2022. After receiving a federal bailout that's expected to dry up in mid-2024, the system moved forward with existing capital projects like a $90 million Fairgate program.
And it's very exciting. I think it's a game changer for BART. It's the number one capital project that we have at BART right now.
One aimed at boosting ridership, says infrastructure manager Sylvia Lamb, and combating fare evasion that BART said accounted for up to $25 million annually in lost revenue pre-pandemic. But it's projects like these that BART is confident will bring back riders, again putting their self-sustaining model in the spotlight.
The biggest thing is to bring riders back, and if they feel safer and it looks cleaner, and that we feel like we're going to get more ridership back.
It's a high-risk, high-reward scenario, one nobody could have seen coming.
It's just this very thorny problem that we spend every day trying to solve.
Harold says that BART is working to change the revenue model away from dependency on riders, but it could still have taxpayers footing the bill down the tracks.
BART is the backbone of the Bay Area. We touch 5 counties. There's not one single solution. It's all going to come together as a package.
That backbone fighting for use across the Bay Area, keeping trains and residents moving forward.
Still ahead, some of the proposals that could pull BART back from the fiscal cliff. But up next, what would happen if BART became a thing of the Bay Area's past? I'll show you what a Bay Area could look like without BART. And later, crime and drug use are keeping people off trains. We'll show you the technology BART police uses to keep passengers safe and which piece they say needs an upgrade. Despite low ridership and revenue, BART is still running. But say there was a scenario where the transit agency didn't run. The first leg of Alec Edge's commute from San Francisco to Oakland is done on 2 wheels. The second leg takes her underground. She's relied on BART to get her to and from work,
Say 4 to 5 days a week.
and all around the Bay Area for more than 10 years.
I love that ad that shows that how one full BART train moves 1,500 people.
But in recent years, regularly full trains have not been the norm. BART ridership hasn't roared back from pandemic lows, and the transit agency that Edges depends on teetered on the verge of a fiscal cliff. BART managed to stay on the tracks, however, without drastic service cuts, thanks in part to a temporary boost from the state, getting a share of $5.1 billion over the next few years that is allocated for transit in California's 2023-2024 state budget. But say that didn't happen. Nothing changed, and BART became a thing of the Bay Area's past. What would that alternate reality look like?
I would say my life would be slower. It'd be more expensive. And it would be a mind shift on how I move around, get around, and make decisions.
Emily Loper, the VP of Public Policy at the Bay Area Council, put it bluntly.
It's impossible to imagine a Bay Area without the BART system.
She says the effects would ripple throughout the region, hurting economies and livelihoods.
BART is the backbone of our regional economy.
And one effect we'd all experience, regardless of whether we ride BART or not.
You know, traffic congestion on roads and highways would skyrocket, and it would really erode our overall quality of life here. It would make it much more difficult to get around.
Loper says we got a preview of this about 10 years ago during the BART strike.
It's pretty ridiculous.
A round-trip car commute during that BART strike from Walnut Creek to San Francisco was over 3 hours. So just imagine the intensity of the traffic and how difficult it would be to move around.
Aside from the inconvenience it would create, all of that extra traffic, says Professor Carrie Watkins from UC Davis, would have a drastic impact on the environment.
The congestion on the freeway, it would have emissions that went along with that congestion. Everybody's going slower, and each car is emitting more.
Watkins, whose expertise is in transit planning and operations, says a Bay Area without BART would reverse significant progress made in the region meeting its climate goals.
The more that we can focus on mode shift from getting people out of vehicles and onto more sustainable modes, transit, cycling, even walking to work, those types of things, the more we're going to make gains in these climate goals.
And thinking bigger picture,
you're creating a less livable city if you don't have a city that has a backbone of a really good transit system.
For now, that isn't the reality. BART will keep moving. But Loper says the status quo must change.
We need to be focused on making BART the best system it can be to draw more riders back and increase fare revenue, and also restore voter confidence in supporting funding measures to support the system going forward.
After her ride under the bay, Edges is back on 2 wheels for the final leg of her commute. Her solution to BART's ridership and revenue reality:
Subsidize it as much as you can. This should be treated like a public service, like, I don't know, water, electricity. It should have as many subsidies as they need, because it will be better. People will use it.
She hopes a Bay Area without BART never becomes a reality. So at one point, Livermore fought for a BART extension, but they never got it. Coming up in our next half hour, why the mayor is glad in the transit solution that he likes even better. Coming up, the staggering cost of bringing BART to downtown San Jose and the multi-million-dollar piece of equipment needed to make that happen. Welcome back. Time now is 6:24 on this Saturday morning. Here's a live look at San Jose, where BART and the VTA are still moving forward with a plan to extend the system into downtown. The project was supposed to cost $4.67 billion and be completed in 2026. But the price ballooned first to $6.9 billion, then to $9.1, and it's now estimated to cost $12.2 billion and not be completed until 2036.
This project's a multi-generational, long-term investment. How much is it too much? We don't know. It's never going to be cheaper than it is now. It's been a major plan in this Bay Area for over 40 years, and we're just about to start digging, so I don't want to hold it up any longer.
They'll be digging with this boring machine. The project requires a 5-mile tunnel from North San Jose into downtown and then to Santa Clara. VTA says the $76 million custom-built machine will create the single largest bore transit tunnel in the world. It's going to take about 18 months to build in Germany before being shipped here to the Bay Area. BART depends on riders for revenue, and without them, the transit system is careening towards a fiscal cliff. Coming up, what it'll take to lure them back if they don't feel safe on board. We continue our deep dive into BART's challenges and potential solutions this morning. BART released new numbers this week that it says shows that their safety measures are working. BART says the number of police incidents delaying train service fell from 374 in May to 295 in October. Back in March, BART police doubled the number of officers on trains by using a combination of sworn officers and unarmed crisis intervention specialists and ambassadors. But is it enough to regain riders' confidence? Well, a recent poll from the Bay Area Council found that 78% say they'd ride BART more often if it was safer and cleaner. Our Wilson Walker hopped on board to hear from riders firsthand.
I started bringing the Clorox during the pandemic, and I don't run out.
Her daily commute runs from Antioch into San Francisco, and Larice Brown always comes prepared.
Civic Center is the worst, I think. That's where I get off, but I think that's a horrible station.
It really depends on which station you're going on.
Harvey Zhao is making his regular trip out of West Oakland.
But I definitely say when you enter the BART station at certain stops, it could be really unsafe.
They are the concerns that have driven many riders away. Crime, cleanliness, open drug use, the problems that have now plagued BART for years.
And one morning, I got to pull out the camera. I got to show my friends this. They're not going to believe it.
In 2018, it was drugs in station hallways that made headlines, and from there, many riders have turned their phones towards BART's struggles, documenting everything from trash to bad behavior. And for riders who feel like crime has been worse on BART in recent years, it has.
For 211, the victim advised that they were robbed at night phone for their phone.
It is robberies that account for the majority of violent crime reported by BART police, and they started rising back in 2015, but while the numbers dropped during the pandemic, they did not drop as much as ridership. Robberies per passenger trip are up in recent years, and a similar trend can be seen with aggravated assaults.
We've heard very clearly from our passengers that they want to see more uniform presence on the trains, both from our sworn police officers and our unarmed civilians.
BART's new chief of police says the answer to crime and rider anxiety is more patrols. They say the current response time to serious incidents is about 4 minutes.
That's exactly how quick you can do it when we're looking for incidents that just occurred.
There are 4,000 cameras across the system, and while the station activity can be reviewed in seconds, the train cameras cannot.
Correct. The videos from the trains currently are a system that's recorded on the individual train cars.
BART is hoping to upgrade from thumb drives to real-time access, but crime, like robberies and assaults, that is just one part of what has riders concerned.
They have not done anything about the homeless. They're laying all over the place. They're doing crack. They're doing this or that.
Hello, I'm going to touch your arm and just say, how are you?
Crisis intervention specialists are deployed, offering help to those who might accept it, but they often end up serving as first responders. Every few days, sometimes several times a day, BART reports a staff member reviving a passenger who could otherwise become the next overdose fatality.
But in the meantime, we do have to ask you to sit up and not be under your blanket on the train.
Another part of the strategy here is the new fare gates, along with helping finances. The hope is that they will also improve riding conditions.
add a little security there, so more people are actually paying their tickets and coming in. They're actually using BART for transportation.
You see a lot of crap on BART. I mean, this is my friend.
Trains that are less chaotic will end up being cleaner. That's another hope for an agency that does spend a lot of time having to clean things up. But in many of these respects, crime, homelessness, the drug crisis, BART is trying to hold back problems that are surging outside the fare gates.
Hello.
Yeah, BART definitely does take on some of the characteristics of the neighborhoods in which our stations are a part of.
Super Civic, there's a subject who's slapping the gate with a hammer, crushing an axe.
So we have seen the challenges facing BART, and they are us, or they're the challenges that we see here in our communities every day, only they're moving through the transit system that connects all of us. How do you fully insulate BART from all of that? Or how do you do it well enough that the passengers who became uncomfortable start feeling a little bit better about getting back on board?
Coming up, if riders do stay away, BART will need new ways to pay its bills. Just ahead, the proposal that could raise your taxes. And later, the Bay Area city turning its back on BART in favor of a different rail system. Welcome back. Right now, BART still has some federal funding from the pandemic. That is set to run out around March of 2025. So now officials are exploring ways to make up the deficit if ridership continues to remain low. Kelsey Thorud explains.
Deborah Allen is one of 9 people on BART's board of directors. She represents District 1, which includes the 4 BART stations from Lafayette to Concord in central Contra Costa County. Before getting elected to the board in 2016, Deborah worked for decades as an accountant and financial officer.
I decided, this would be a place where I could bring my financial background to possibly, help the public and do some good.
But when Deborah got into office, she says she quickly realized BART's finances were in trouble.
If you look at the numbers for the operating costs and spending since the pandemic, it has consistently, for the most part, risen every year.
From 2018 to 2022, BART's operating expenses increased from $992 million to just over $1 billion. While at the same time, operating revenues plummeted from $546 million to just $166 million. To cover that gap, BART received emergency funding from the federal government, but that funding runs out in 2025. And with ridership still below half of what it was pre-pandemic, BART needs to come up with a new source of funding fast, or risk significant cuts to services. One of the people working to secure that funding is State Senator Scott Wiener.
And so we need stopgap emergency funds to make sure that these systems don't fall apart.
There are a few different ways BART can secure funding. The state could raise bridge tolls or taxes on things like gas and sales. It could also just increase its investment in transportation from the state's general fund. Senator Wiener told me that's the option he thinks is best.
That would be the cleanest way of doing it. It makes sense for the state to step in and do it.
But it's unclear how realistic that option is. BART says it will need around $300 million a year starting in 2025 just to stay afloat. And it comes at a time when the state is dealing with its own budget deficit. That's why Senator Wiener is also the author of a bill that looks to increase bridge tolls to fund BART.
And we also have ideas about how to make sure that commuters who are really commuting every day on the bridges are not harmed.
BART itself is also working to get a voter initiative on the 2026 ballot that would raise taxes to fund the system. The hope is that one or a combination of these different ideas will work to get BART back above water.
However, public polling from an organization called Joint Venture Silicon Valley suggests securing any of those funding options may not be that easy. Russell Hancock is the president and CEO of Joint Venture.
Specifically, we asked about our region's struggling rail systems, BART and Caltrain, and we learned some interesting things.
According to Joint Venture's poll, 57% of respondents said commuter rail needs to keep going even if it costs taxpayers more money. But when asked where that money should come from, the same percentage of people, 57%, disliked all of the available options, including raising fares, bridge tolls, and taxes. Angel Sembrano has been riding BART to work every day for the past 25 years. He told me he's a part of the other 43%, those willing to pay more if it means services aren't cut.
I think it's a good idea because otherwise, how can I get to my work without the BART?
But Deborah told me the issue will be getting those who don't ride BART every day on board. She understands many of them are frustrated with BART's handling of its finances. She is too. That's why she's not only looking into ways to secure more funding for BART, but she's also looking into ways to cut costs on everything from future projects to labor.
This board has refused to ask for concessions out of the labor contracts on things, not necessarily on just, pay decreases. We could be talking about overtime rules, which are very generous to BART employees.
But union leaders say even if they wanted to, renegotiating the labor contract wouldn't solve the funding problem. They believe it would only make it harder for them to retain employees.
This has to be a state-level solution for all transit agencies. It ain't going to be by cutting raises or laying people off that you're going to get there, all right?
Deborah told me she knows BART can't just cut costs to get out of its deficit. Her hope is to find a balance of both cutting costs and securing additional funding.
Perhaps if 80 million of cuts can be found in an annual budget, now we're only looking for 120 million per year of revenue, and that might be more palatable to taxpayers, to bridge toll payers, or to even state and local governments.
Deborah told me she believes the more people see BART trying to rein in its spending, the more willing they may be to support future funding of the system and help BART avoid its looming fiscal cliff.
BART will soon be looking for at least one new leader. Rebecca Saltzman, who has served as a director since 2012, announced she will not run for re-election. She says she made the decision to spend more time with her family. She and her wife welcomed a baby in 2019. In a series of tweets, she says she is happy she ran for re-election in 2020. She helped the agency navigate COVID and all the issues that came with it. She adds BART is emerging from the pandemic as a more innovative and responsive agency. When we come back, our BART on the Brink special coverage continues. Up next, bypassing BART, the new track One East Bay City is taking. BART's Blue Line runs from Daly City to the Dublin Pleasanton station, and right now there is no connection to Livermore and the San Joaquin Valley. At one point, it was considered a missed opportunity. But now, one East Bay mayor who originally fought hard for that extension no longer believes BART is their best option. He told Juliette Goodrich the valley is creating its own solution.
Let's take a ride back 5 years to 2018. Our lead story, BART to Livermore.
Should trains run all the way to Livermore? East Bay commuters waiting on a key decision tonight.
That key decision, a proposed BART extension that would run along 580 from the Dublin Pleasanton station to a new station near Livermore. At the time, Livermore's mayor was John Marchand.
We have been working to bring 5 miles of BART for 40 years. It's time.
But according to the BART board, it wasn't time and voted against a BART to Livermore extension. Mayor Marchand's view on BART now? Today, 5 years later,
BART is a train wreck.
we talked to the mayor just after he rode BART from Pleasanton to Oakland to attend an Alameda Transportation Commission meeting.
There's a guy smoking crack on my car, so I'm fold it out and start smoking right on the train.
He took photos.
So this is Monday, and this is a guy smoking crack.
Mayor Marchand says he would still like to see more public transit options, but he joins other residents who are convinced BART just isn't the best option for them.
Let me ask you, so the last time you rode BART?
I'd say about a year and a half ago.
Took you a while to remember?
I would use it if I felt like it was a viable option, that it was safer.
People no longer think of BART as safe. BART used to be fun. But BART is now, it's become an ordeal.
But driving in heavy traffic is also an ordeal. So this is 580 heading toward Livermore on a good day, but there is always traffic and trucks driving along this route and no public transit once you pass the Dublin Pleasanton BART station.
I think BART's in a death spiral, and I think one of the really saving graces for BART may be to actually, it's another project that I'm working on, and that's Valley Link.
Valley Link is a proposed commuter rail from the Dublin Pleasanton BART to the San Joaquin Valley, adding stops along the way. 580 in Livermore, Mountain House, Tracy, and North Lathrop. The Tri-Valley San Joaquin Regional Rail Authority is leading the effort. Is Valley Link full speed ahead? Is this a go?
We are full speed ahead, currently in the environmental and preliminary engineering phase.
How far along are we down the track, so to speak, to seeing a Valley Link?
So our goal is to complete construction by the end of 2027. There are currently approximately 200,000 vehicles a day going over the Altamont Pass coming from the San Joaquin Valley, and there is not a rail transit station. This is much like an e-BART style train, except it wouldn't be run by BART. We'd simply be delivering the commuters to BART's front door, and that in essence would bring their fare revenues back up because we're bringing the customer to their front gate.
Mayor Marchand believes it is just the link BART needs.
So the real saving grace is going to be transit, and that's going to be Valley Link, hydrogen-powered train, zero pollution, coming over the Altamont, carrying thousands of people to connect with BART. And as I said, that's, I think, going to be BART's saving grace.
The mayor says this link is vital because many people live in the San Joaquin Valley for affordable housing, and they spend hours commuting in cars to work here in the Bay Area. And our deep dive into BART this week has been a two-way street. We've been interested in what you've had to say about your experiences on BART. After the break, we'll share some of your comments. Stay with us. All this week, as we reported on BART, we asked you about your experiences on board. Some riders expressed concern for their safety. A woman named Susan described her recent trip from SFO to her home in the East Bay on a Monday night. She said, after other SFO passengers disembarked at Embarcadero, I was left on a car with two different parties of creepy, drug-induced passengers. Just tired me, my two suitcases, and them. I was very uncomfortable as one of them was injecting himself while a member of the other party was openly smoking something from foil. But not all of the feedback has been negative. Rider Monica told us, I worked in San Francisco and used the BART system daily. Yes, some days we experience problems, but every transportation system has problems. I never have experienced any violence or other dangerous situations. I support the system 100%. You can share your experiences with BART using the hashtag KPIX-TV on social media, or you can email newsdesk@kpix.com, and we do want to hear from you. We also want to encourage you to keep watching CBS News Bay Area for new information on BART. In the coming days, our Juliette Goodrich will talk to BART's Inspector General about her investigations into fraud and waste aimed at saving the agency much-needed money. Also, the MTC will vote on a proposal that would give BART more than $350 million to help keep the system on the rails. And looking even further ahead, we'll be following that controversial ballot measure that could tax everyone, rider or not, to help fill BART's coffers. You'll be able to catch these stories live here on KPIX and streaming on CBS News Bay Area and, of course, always on KPIX.com.